20 doctors can't save a billionaire. Then the black housekeeper spots what they missed. The richest man in the city lay helpless in his sprawling penthouse suite. Richard Bennett, billionaire, investor, and a man used to controlling everything around him, was now at the mercy of his own failing body. 20 of the finest doctors in America had been flown into his bedside. Specialists from London and Toronto joined them, hovering over glowing monitors, whispering urgent theories, prescribing stronger medications. And yet, Richard only grew weaker. His once commanding voice was reduced to shallow whispers. His piercing blue eyes, once intimidating boardrooms full of executives, were now dull, restless, and frightened. The great titan of industry had become a man waiting on an answer that no one seemed able to give. Everyone in the room was focused on machines, numbers, and scans. Everyone, except one. Standing quietly at the corner of the room was Grace, his longtime housekeeper. She had dusted his shelves, polished his silver, and carried his laundry for over a decade. Nobody noticed her now, no one ever really did. But Grace noticed everything. As she watched the doctors move around, she saw the billionaire's hand tremble against the blanket. She stepped closer, ignoring the wary glance of a nurse. She touched his hand gently. It was ice cold, not in the medical sense, but in the human sense. "Mr. Bennett," she whispered, "when was the last time you ate?" The billionaire's lips moved. No one leaned in to listen. But Grace did. And what she heard shook her. I can't swallow. Feels like choking." Grace's eyes widened. She'd seen this before, not in a hospital, but in her own mother back in Georgia, who'd suffered a stroke years ago. Her mother hadn't needed more machines. She needed someone to recognize the simplest thing. Food and medicine were slipping down the wrong way. "Stop," Grace said suddenly, her voice louder than she intended. All 20 doctors turned to stare at her. "You're giving him medication he can't swallow. It's going into his lungs." The room fell silent. One doctor frowned. Another shook his head. But a younger physician hesitated. He leaned over Richard, checked the back of his throat, and then ran a quick test. His face went pale. "She's right. Richard wasn't dying of some mysterious disease. He was aspirating. His food and pills were entering his lungs instead of his stomach. It was simple, deadly, and shockingly overlooked. Within hours, with proper feeding support and adjusted medication, Richard's strength began to return. His color improved. He could breathe again without the terrifying rattling sound that had filled the room before. The doctors looked stunned. Grace just smiled softly, brushing his hair back like a mother would for her child. Days later, when Richard could finally speak clearly, he asked for Grace. She came into the room, humble as ever, her hands still worn from years of scrub. The air in the room was heavy with silence. The billionaire's breathing grew easier, each rise of his chest steadier than the last. The doctors shifted uncomfortably, some embarrassed, some relieved. But Grace didn't stand there for recognition. She only cared that the man she'd served for years was no longer slipping away before her eyes. Later that evening, when the nurses had cleared the machines and the specialists had flown back home, Richard stirred awake to find Grace sitting quietly by the window. She wasn't scrolling through her phone or scribbling notes. She was just there, watching over him with the same quiet loyalty she always had. "You knew," he whispered. She looked at him with gentle eyes. "I just paid attention. That's all." His throat tightened. For years, he had overlooked her presence, the way she folded his shirts perfectly, the way she kept the house so spotless he barely noticed the work it took. He had built his empire on the idea that money solved every problem. But now, at his weakest, it wasn't money that saved him. It was compassion. He reached for her hand, something he'd never done before. "Grace, I owe you my life." She shook her head. "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Bennett. Just don't forget that sometimes people need to be seen, not just treated." Those words pierced deeper than any medical diagnosis. He thought about his staff, his family, even strangers on the street. How many had he ignored? How many voices had gone unheard simply because he thought they had nothing important to say? When he finally recovered, Richard called his lawyers. Instead of planning another acquisition, he began drafting something new, a foundation in Grace's honor. A program to train caregivers and hospital staff to recognize the human side of healing, the signs that machines miss and charts don't capture. Months later, Grace watched a press conference from the back of a crowded hall. Cameras flashed as Richard announced the launch of the Grace Initiative, dedicated to honoring the wisdom and kindness of people like her. When he mentioned her name, the audience erupted into applause. Grace lowered her head, tears filling her eyes. She hadn't saved him for applause or recognition. She had simply done what felt right. But seeing her name spoken with gratitude reminded her of something powerful. Sometimes the quietest act of compassion can echo farther than you'll ever know. And for the first time, Richard Bennett understood what it meant to be truly